Hey folks, welcome to another installment of AP Daily for AP Psychology. Today we're discussing topic 1.3. In Daily Video 2, we'll identify the basic anatomy of a typical neuron and discuss the role that each of those anatomical structures play. I'm Mike Hamilton, and I teach at Hopkinton High School in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. So a typical neuron, that's what the typical neuron looks like. There are lots and lots of different types of neurons, lots of different shapes and sizes, but this one is what we're going to use as kind of our standard or prototype neuron. So basics before we get into in-depth in anatomy. So what you just saw, that neuron, there are an estimated 80 billion, although there are lots and lots of varied estimates of how many actual neurons there are in the nervous system. But those are the building blocks of the human nervous system, and they allow all communication in the body and mind. So there are lots of different types. Some have really, really great specificity. For example, when you do sensation and perception in this course, you'll learn about feature detector cells. You have a set of neurons that only respond to various shapes of lines, angles, and so forth. And so some neurons have really, really, really specific jobs. But in general, neurons do three things. They receive messages from other neurons. They carry that message down the length of its axon, and then at the end, that neuron can pass the message along. So they can send messages to other neurons. All of this process is done within milliseconds, and in some cases, fractions of a millisecond. Neural impulses can travel as fast as 330 miles per hour, which means you can get a message from your head to the end of your big toe in a matter of milliseconds. And in the big picture, just thinking about the question, how do any thoughts that we have occur, emotions, movements, things like that? If we were to oversimplify it as much as we possibly could, it's this. It's just that cells fire in a particular pattern, and that thought that you have is a result of those varied cell-firing patterns. So if we look at the anatomy more in depth now, the area that's highlighted in orange there are three parts here that we're going to look at. Soma refers to body. It's the Greek word for body. So that's the body of your cell, which encompasses your nucleus. So the soma helps protect and keep the major parts of the interior and nucleus healthy. And then all of these little branch-like things protruding, those are called dendrites. Any given cell could have tens of these, hundreds of these, or thousands of these, which means that one neuron, if it has thousands of dendrites, could be receiving messages from thousands of other neurons. So dendrites detect messages or receive messages and then pass them into the soma and then eventually down to the next part of our neural chain, which what's highlighted in orange here is the axon. Axons, you can think of them as a tube that messages are going to go down. So when I say messages, I'm referring to an electrical impulse or an action potential. So my little lightning bolts represent that electrical message being conducted down the axon. In your anatomy, you have axons that are so tiny they have to be seen under a microscope to be able to notice that anything's there, all the way to the other extreme where you have axons that run the length, for example, in your sciatic nerve, they run the length from your lower back all the way down to your toes. So axons can vary greatly in size, but they all do the same thing. They're carrying the neural message or electrical impulse down the length of that tube. So some of your axons, but not all, have what's highlighted here in purple and called myelin sheath. So myelin sheath, it's a fatty substance that encases axons. And again, not every axon has them, but the axons that do are better protected, and the neural message or action potential skips down those axons much, much faster than a neuron that doesn't have a myelinated axon. Also of note, there are several diseases that are linked to problems with myelin creation or deterioration. One example is multiple sclerosis that you might study in your psychology course. So this slide is a good example of just when I say that messages travel faster, this is what I mean. On the right is a myelinated neuron, And you can see that action potential, that purple flash here, just skipping down that much, much more quickly than the one on the left that doesn't have myelin. So now we come to the end of the neuron. This is the terminal, or the axon terminal. Terminal means end. And so I've highlighted at the bottom there, all of those little bubbles are called terminal buttons. And again, just like with dendrites, a cell can have tens of these, hundreds of these, or even thousands of these, which would allow communication with thousands of other dendrites for other neurons. So if we were to get a close-up of what a terminal button looks like, it's the picture that's here on the left. This would be a terminal button, and it's full of these things. Those little bubbles inside are called synaptic vesicles, and those in turn are full of neurotransmitters. So those little green dots are neurotransmitters that will float out into the synapse. So again, this space, it's labeled up here. That space is a synaptic gap. None of your neurons are touching. For every one of those terminal buttons, there's a space between them. And then to the right is a dendrite of a postsynaptic neuron. So those neurotransmitters will cross the synapse and lock into that dendrite. And if enough of them lock in, that neuron will fire. We do much more with that in the next daily video where we look at neural transmission. But for now, one thing that might help you just kind of remember the parts in the order of neural firing is a little acronym. We're going to use DSATs. So the message starts at the dendrite, then goes to the soma, then the A is for axon, T is for terminal button, and then the lowercase s, because synapses are so tiny, I put that as a lowercase s rather than a capital S. So that's the order that a neuron fires. That's the progression: dendrite, soma, axon, terminal button, and then out into the synapse. So that little acronym might help you organize. But let's do a quick retrieval practice with what you've just learned. Number your paper from 1 to 5, and let's see if you can accurately match the names of the various parts of the neuron that you just learned about to the diagram. So you might want to pause the video in just a second. The parts are on the left, they're written out for you, and then you just want to see if you can identify which part goes with each number. So go ahead, take a moment, pause the video, see if you can do this. And here is the answer key for you. How'd you do? Hopefully you were able to do okay on this. If not, you can come back and practice multiple times. But what we want to take away from what we were just doing is that an understanding that each neuron throughout your brain and body has several basic anatomical structures in common. Each of those has a very specific job, and those enable networks of neurons to easily and efficiently communicate with each other. That's a wrap for today.